Victory conditions in base Warhammer 3 just plain suck. The best you can hope for is to take out a specific faction or two and maybe control a specific province, but most of the time it's essentially don't lose your starting war and take 30 settlements. Doesn't matter which ones, we don't really care. All of this is just for the short victory. For the long one, you're normally looking at over double the amount of settlement spam as well as the occasional settlement or faction checklist that makes next to zero sense. And let's not even talk about the rewards. More hero capacity or recruit rank, I would literally rather gain an extra 5 gold per turn. Well, no longer. The Victory Conditions Overhaul mod changes the victory conditions of almost every single faction in the game and not only makes them a lot more engaging and varied from faction to faction, they also rework how victory conditions work in general and make the rewards a lot more worth the effort, making playing after achieving a victory actually a thing that seems kind of fun. So, let's take a look at the current system, its problems, and how this mod addresses each one. But first, be sure to check out today's sponsor, Instant Gaming, if you want some cheap games. The last couple of years have seen some of the best game releases of the last decade, but why worry about paying full price when you can use Instant Gaming to stay up to date without breaking the bank? They offer heavy discounts on almost any game you can think of on just about every platform you can play on, all backed up by their 24/7 customer service. Check them out at the link in the description, and thanks again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. So instead of the usual mod review where I go over how everything works, since that would boil down to install the mod, start campaign, and boom, there are the new conditions, I'm instead going to spend this video giving my thoughts on why this mod is so great and how it showcases the glaring problems with the base game's approach to objectives. So let's first take a look at a few victory conditions for popular campaigns in Warhammer 3. Across the board, we see the same types of uninspired conditions that boil down to conquest that you'd very likely do anyway. For Karl Franz, you need to beat your starting war, which is just absurd that it counts as a condition, as well as taking out the nearby vampires. And don't forget about all those settlements you have to interact with in basically any way. Okay, whilst technically this gives you some direction, if you're playing the game, you'll organically end up doing these things anyway, so it's less of a goal and more of something that just happens. It's the equivalent of booting a game for the first time and getting a Steam achievement. Technically, I did do something, but it's hardly noteworthy because it was basically inevitable. Now, I'm not saying that victory conditions have to be really obscure and require you to go extremely out of your way to achieve them. I just want them to feel like more of an achievement and a goal you have to work towards rather than an inevitability. This is a sandbox game, not a linear story. Leave a bit of room for variety. Speaking of story, it'd be nice to have a line of flavor text about why we need to do these things. How hard would it be to write? After years of his countrymen going missing, only to wind up being puppeted by the undead, Karl Franz has had enough and has rallied his troops to wipe out the undead scourge once and for all. It's a little touch that most people would probably ignore, but it shows that some care went into your objectives rather than it seeming like someone at CA threw darts at a map to decide where you need to go. The rewards for this are the aforementioned hero capacity upgrades, and while this can technically be useful if you're a big fan of heroes like CA for some reason is, doesn't it feel a little bit inconsequential? You could get this short victory condition, or you could just build a few buildings and get the exact same reward. The rewards for completing a campaign should be something unique that you can't get anywhere else. As little sense as it made in Realms of Chaos, completing the game and being able to use Be'lakor whilst playing as Kislev did spice up the gameplay if you decided to keep going. CA clearly know that making the game fun beyond the first 50 turns, let alone the short victory, is a challenge, and yet they continue to not only have no incentive outside of Steam achievements, but also make the march to get there as tedious and repetitive as possible. And that brings me to my final point on vanilla victory conditions. They're the same every time. If you really love playing as Karl Franz, outside of making your own goals, you're doomed to doing the same thing over and over and over again. While there are a ton of campaigns in the game, at present each one has only one way to play. So if you're an Empire main, you have 5 campaigns and then you're done. And that finally brings us to this mod. Every one of these problems is addressed and improved upon, and it makes every campaign affected more fun, more varied, and more rewarding, so let's take a look. Speaking of those affected, this mod doesn't quite cover every single legendary lord in the game, but about 70% of them so far, which ain't half bad. You can tell who has modded conditions by the beginner-friendly symbol, which has now been repurposed to show who's been changed. Right off the bat, instead of the short or long victories, we have the choice of 3 routes to victory, with each one offering their own sets of rewards, alongside the option to call it win and stop playing if you so wish. Each of these routes has a few nice lines of flavor text, setting the scene and giving you some motivations and role-playing outside of box checking. Like I said, it's a small change, but it shows that some thought has been put into these objectives and makes them a little bit more organic. Like, yeah, Marion Brittenberg leaving the EU, Empire Union, would probably tick everyone off. They should probably come back or perish. The whispers of the end times looming would probably spur the Order Tide into action, and who better to unite them than Karl? Now, to address the giant plastic crack-making entity in the room, it's very likely that Games Workshop would want to approve every single one of these to make sure that they're happy with them. but that email chain would be worth it if we would get something actually interesting to aim for. I can't pretend to have any understanding of the complex relationship between Creative Assembly and Games Workshop, but surely they'd eat something like this up, as it's a great way to get your more casual players hooked onto the lore, which they can then sell for £25 a book. Personally, I could care less about the Warhammer lore, since I'm mainly here for the cool units and fun gameplay mechanics. However, if my campaign felt a little bit more narrative focused, maybe I'm tempted to learn more about the Chaos Dwarf who transferred his soul into an anvil. Plus, having any lore at all tied to victory conditions kind of shifts this game from being a box checking sandbox to a little bit more of an RPG. Now, I am using that term very loosely, but you can take on the role of Carl, uniting the world and pushing back the undead, instead of just doing it to put a tick on a to-do list. Coming back to this multiple routes change, while it's not perfect and can regularly leave a route open to complete the campaign in under 30 turns, it offers so much more variety for each playthrough. You can choose to hit them all in one go, do separate campaigns for each one, or play the same campaign over and over and choose a different one to focus on first every single time. Now yes, eventually you'll run out of orders and combinations to do these things, but it'll take you 3 times as long as it normally would, so it's still an improvement. Now the main thing that I love is no more occupy, loot, raise or sack 30 different settlements. This is one of the laziest things in the game and I absolutely hate it. It's an artificial objective that solely exists to stop people from completing the campaign too quickly. Whenever I've achieved a victory of any kind, this has always been the last thing I've accomplished because it's just unnecessary padding. It just screams, we didn't know what objectives to put in place that would make this fun for long campaigns, so we added this instead. Okay. Rant over, the mod does away with this and I couldn't agree more with this choice. It means that every legendary lord now feels different beyond their mechanics and whose voice lines you're hearing on a loop for 10 hours. Before you could play as Carl and Tyrion, and of course they're in different locations, have different rosters and mechanics, but once you've completed the basic objectives, you're just taking part in endless pointless conquest until you hit 30, you basically did with your eyes shut. Now they'll play a lot different and keep the game fresh for much longer. Plus, they address my issue that before they felt like inevitable actions you'd eventually complete anyway. While there's still some of this, since most factions will always end up fighting the same factions eventually, these objectives are a lot more defined and you still have something to do that's specific. For example, as Carl you still have the option to clear out the undead, but now that also includes Dryker, and as well as this you need to secure the Empire's borders to make sure they don't come back. It's a subtle change, but it makes a big difference. The option of 3 different routes also helps with my inevitability problem. While you'll likely fight all of these factions if the campaign goes on for long enough, now you can pick and choose which wars to funnel all of your resources into pursuant to their ends, and which ones to be content with holding your ground. It gives you more variety in what you're prioritizing and a real sense of having actually done something yourself instead of having the actions happen to you. And my final issue, the rewards, has also been addressed in a major way. As I said, each route can technically function as a campaign victory and an endpoint. However, they each also come with their own set of bonuses to make use of if you decide to keep playing, and compared to vanilla, that's a lot more enticing. Now, some of them are a little bit all over the place, like yeah, attack stats at sea is a little bit niche, but still, it's a unique effect that you can't get anywhere else, so I'm all for it. They also have some final quest battles, which I didn't even realize mods could do, but I'm very glad to find out as a thing. Oh, and each victory bonus comes with its own bit of flavor text as another flex to show they're not mucking around. Now, I mean this with all of my heart and all of my soul. Creative Assembly, if you are watching this video, pay Wolfie and the rest of his contributors to hand over their list of victory conditions and make this base game. Sure, you can get GW to give it a once over and correct any law, but this should be in the base game. It improves on every single thing in the basic system, fixes every single gripe that I can think of, and while it's definitely not perfect, it's head and shoulders above what we have right now. We would be losing nothing if this replaced all the victory conditions currently in Immortal Empires, because as it stands, they're an afterthought. I'm going to have this permanently in my mod list moving forward, and I highly encourage everyone else to do so as well. It's compatible with almost everything, has no performance impact, and will improve almost every campaign you play with it. Especially if you're a player that has beaten every campaign already and the game is quite boring, this is offering you a new way to play and freshens up the game massively. But with that, I think I've talked about everything I wanted to in this video. Let me know what you think of this mod down in the comments below, and tell me any other mods you want me to take a look at. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Warhammer 3 mod videos, then check out this video on the Lost Cam mod, adding a bunch of dino units to the Lizardmen.